Good morning and welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll get right to the business of Inquisition Update and continue our reading and discussion of this book, most revealing book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. We're talking about the time in American history during the Cold War, the presidency of the first Roman Catholic president of the United States, John F. Kennedy. We're talking about the same period as Vatican Council II, and all the elements of deception are in place. I want to set the stage for the discussion this morning. Remember, we talked about the Council of Trent, that it was convened by the Jesuits not more than 30 years or so after the official start of the Protestant Reformation in 1517. And it was a declaration of all-out war of annihilation against Protestantism. It damned virtually every Protestant tenet of faith. And it reinforced the traditional Roman Catholicism. And it literally labeled Protestants as liberals and heretics. And the war began, a war that is not even acknowledged to exist today in most quote-unquote Christian circles. But it's alive and well and taking its casualties innumerable. The Vatican has waged war against Protestantism ever since the Second Vatican Council, the Council of Trent. It has never retracted any of its condemnations for Protestantism or its individual beliefs, the very tenets of Protestantism. And the war goes on today, despite the lack of knowledge of this being true. It still goes on today, and it was especially true during the Kennedy administration. We have Jesuit-controlled communist Russia and Jesuit-controlled Catholic America, pitted in a Cold War with the threat of nuclear annihilation as the stakes. At the same time, we have a Roman Catholic president in the White House from a family, a Roman Catholic family, which helped to install No Din Diem, the Roman Catholic priest wannabe, as president of South Vietnam in a Buddhist country, and a United States war against Vietnam at the same time. The country was torn apart because of war, weary of war, destitute for war, and we have a threat of nuclear annihilation during the Kennedy administration when Jesuit-controlled Khrushchev put nuclear intercontinental ballistic missiles in Cuba. Now, you've heard me say that Vatican Council II was an ultimatum, consistent with the tenets of the all-out war of annihilation against Protestantism declared at the Vatican at the Council of Trent. That's when the line in the sand was drawn for Protestants during Vatican Council II. You either come home to the Roman Catholic Church or suffer the consequences. You have for 200 years believed in a future Antichrist, a single individual. You have, by your own admission, tacitly exonerated the entire history of the papacy as the Antichrist. No longer can you perceive or conceive or claim that the papacy is the Antichrist, because you now believe in a future one that comes just 7 years before Christ returns, signs a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews, and in the midst of that 7 years, breaks the treaty. So you've exonerated the papacy. That was the very basis of the Protestant Reformation, that the papacy was the Antichrist. So there is no more Protestantism in America. Now, all of you so-called Protestant churches must come back to the Roman Catholic Church. You must restore to the papacy all that it lost because of the Protestant Reformation. You must restore all the governments of the world to my control. You must restore my land. You must restore my gold. You must restore my temporal and spiritual authority in the world. You took it away from me. You took it away, admittedly, wrongly, because of your futurist beliefs. You profess with your mouth, every time you believe in a future Antichrist, you profess with your mouth that the papacy is exonerated. And you have a moral obligation, a spiritual obligation, a temporal obligation to restore all that was taken from the papacy at the time of the Protestant Reformation. The Council of Trent was a declaration of war. Vatican Council II was an opportunity to surrender with an ultimatum. At the very time of Vatican Council II, there were intercontinental ballistic missiles in Cuba, a Roman Catholic president in the White House, and the message was clear. You either come back to the Roman Catholic Church, or the threat of nuclear annihilation is in the offing, or at least a possibility. You're having to deal with the very real threat that there are nuclear weapons just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. And remember, Fidel Castro was devoutly Roman Catholic, and he was Jesuit trained. Now, many will roll their eyes and say, oh, Tom, all this happened together just as coincidence. When your eyes are opened and you're no longer naive about the role of the papacy in the world, and if you're no longer naive about papal history, which we are not naive here at Inquisition Update. We've read many, many books on the history of the papacy, and we've seen their strategies used throughout history, and we instantly recognize what is going on at Vatican Council II. Council of Trent declared the war. We have this Jesuit orchestrated control on both sides, the Soviet Union and the United States, presenting before the world this nuclear crisis, the threat of global annihilation, all at the same time Vatican Council II was coming, and the ultimatum is given. Now, after believing in futurism, now it's time you come back to the Roman Catholic Church, or else. And it's my personal belief that there were many Protestant pastors in this country that understood what that ultimatum was. They literally understood what that ultimatum was. I either lead my congregations back in this spirit of ecumenism and peace and unity with the Roman Catholic Church, or the Roman Catholic Church, the papacy, has the power to bring about all the hell on earth. And without telling their congregations, they became signers of this ecumenical movement. And with all those signatures in hand, now the papacy has control in politics in Washington, D.C. Oh, it's not all about religion. It's all about politics. With the capitulation of the Protestant Reformation, the surrender of the Protestants to the Roman Catholic Church, they now have a political, unopposable juggernaut and agenda in America. That is the consequence of futurism, which, by the way, was created by the Jesuit order in the first place. You see, it was never taught in the Roman Catholic Church, obviously, that the papacy was the Antichrist, that the papacy was the little horn of Daniel. Roman Catholics were not allowed to believe in that sort of thing. They were considered heretics, just like Protestants. So there had to be an alternative explanation for those prophecies. Never mind that they so perfectly fit the papacy that it cannot hardly be denied. So they foisted among the Catholics a future Antichrist, a single individual. You see, futurism was always taught in the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church had to have a way, the papacy had to have a way to convince Catholics, hey, the Pope is not the Antichrist. Here, believe this. Now, there are many explanations that were taught in the Roman Catholic Church, but futurism was one of them. It's a long-standing teaching in the Roman Catholic Church that the Antichrist would be a single individual, probably a Jew, of the lineage of David, and that he would sign a peace treaty with the Jews. That Israel was going to be restored, Jerusalem was going to be restored, and all of that is yet future. And of course, Roman Catholics, wanting to believe that their Pope is the man of God on earth, gladly received that falsehood. And it was just common belief in the Roman Catholic Church. And all the Jesuits had to do was to foist that false belief among Protestants. And so they began to teach futurism in the Protestant seminaries, convincing Protestant pastors that it was not the papacy that was the Antichrist, the little horn, the son of perdition, the man of sin, the Antichrist of the Bible. No, it's not the papacy. It's a single individual. And of course, if Jesus is not the one who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease 2,000 years ago, in the midst of the week when he gave up his own life as the Lamb of God, then the Antichrist must be the one that causes the sacrifices and oblations to cease. So if there's animal sacrifices, then there must be a nation state of Israel. There must be Jews living in the land. There must be a temple. There must be a priesthood. There must be the ashes of the red heifer. There must be sacrifices in the temple for at least 3.5 years. And in the midst of that week, the Antichrist, the future Antichrist, the single individual will cause those sacrifices and oblations to cease. Well, I guess the Pope is not the Antichrist then, is he? See how it works? Well, that has tremendous consequences. Tremendous consequences. If that is now the belief of Protestantism, then you Protestants have absolutely decimated the rightful throne of God on earth, the papacy. And you've got to renounce your Protestantism. Keep your Protestant names if you want. You can still call yourself a Baptist, a Lutheran, a Methodist, a Episcopalian, whatever you want. But you got to come home to Mama. You got to put yourself under the rightful throne of God Almighty. If you're going to call yourself a Christian, if you're going to be righteous, then you must at least accept the authority, the spiritual and temporal authority of the papacy. And if you accept the spiritual and temporal power of the Pope, then you must fight his wars to regain all that you stole from him during the Protestant Reformation. Now, if that message wasn't sold among the laity, which it was not, it was certainly sold in Washington, D.C. And every Roman Catholic, every devout Roman Catholic, whether he be a liberal Roman Catholic or a conservative, traditional Council of Trent Roman Catholic, they now have a political and moral mandate when they take office in Washington, D.C. to do the Pope's bidding, to restore the papacy to global supremacy. They dare not talk about it openly, but that is their moral obligation. Protestantism, by their own confession, was an error against the throne of Almighty God on earth, the papacy. And so, therefore, this nation, with or without its full understanding and knowledge, must restore the papacy to its height of power in the world. Not just over Europe, but over the entire world. I mean, after all, the papacy has always taught that as the vicar of Christ on earth, he has every right and every authority to rule over the kings of the earth. Not just Europe, but over the entire earth. And in order to get this done, we needed the Cold War. We needed the persecution of the Jews during the Second World War to justify the need for a modern nation state of Israel, the very stage upon which the papacy hopes to perform this futurist lie, but to persecute the Orthodox who rebelled against the Roman Catholic Church in 1054 AD, to persecute the Protestants in Europe for their rebellion against the so-called rightful authority of the papacy, and literally turning Europe over to Christ, taking Europe away from Antichrist and giving it to Christ himself. That was the horror of Vatican of the First World War, or the First and the Second World War. It was a war against Protestantism. But neither the First World War nor the Second World War took the same toll as did Vatican Council II and futurism. They go hand in hand. Had there never been futurism, had there never been taught among Protestants that the Pope is not the Antichrist, it's a single individual at the end of time, there never would have been Vatican Council II. Rome would have never had the authority to convene Vatican Council II and demand that the Protestants come back to the Roman Catholic Church. We'd still regarded the papacy as the Antichrist, just like the Protestant reformers did. We'd have still had a day and night watchful eye on our government to make sure that the papacy wasn't, through his Roman Catholics in government, passing civil laws that virtually mirror Roman Catholic canon law, and that we're being made Catholics by the civil law. But if you believe in a future Antichrist, if by that you exonerate the entire history of the papacy, then there's no need to watch the Roman Catholics in politics in Washington or anywhere else. We're all equally Christians. But for those in the know, those who understood history and the Bible, Vatican Council II was simply orchestrated to fall at the same time as this communist threat, this anti-Christ communist threat, and the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation, just to put the emphasis where it belonged during Vatican Council II. To set the background for Vatican Council II. How many Protestant pastors, how many of the Protestant leaders that went to Vatican Council II knew what the ultimatum was? With Khrushchev's nuclear missiles in Cuba, Roman Catholic Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast, and a Roman crusade taking place in Vietnam at the same time. The Cold War had us all ducking under our desks at school. It was on our minds, day and night. Children drawing pictures in their classrooms with their pencils and papers of missiles falling on the United States. I remember doing it myself. The teacher said, now pull out a piece of paper and a pencil and just draw a picture for the next half hour. What was the purpose of that? Just to see what was on our minds. And guess what was on our minds? Nuclear annihilation. I got a chance to see some of the drawings that the other kids were making in the classroom. Several more. Not just me, but several others were drawing a picture of the United States with missiles falling on it. We were indoctrinated by our own schools, our own media, and it was all to help Vatican Council II. The Cold War was the threat, the big boogeyman that made us all lose our minds. Now that threat is not so much nuclear annihilation, or let's just say in addition to nuclear annihilation, is environmental annihilation. That there's just not enough gas, not enough oil, not enough oxygen, too much carbon dioxide, too many comets, too many, asteroids, too many supernova, not enough water. There's too many people in the world. We have to start charging for carbon emissions, or we're going to pollute ourselves into annihilation. It's the new Cold War. Environmentalism is the new Cold War. It's the new boogeyman. It's the new threat. And despite those who comprehend that the God of gods, the God of creation, who created this world in 6 days and told man to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth and to subdue the earth, was so inept as if we obeyed that command to fill the earth and to subdue it, that we would annihilate ourselves through pollution. He wasn't smart enough to give us enough water. The God of creation wasn't smart enough to give us enough oil to heat our homes, to cook our food. The God of gods was not smart enough to realize that if we really did multiply and fill the earth, that we would suffocate in our own carbon dioxide. So we need a new God. Someone to save us. And guess who that is? The papacy. Watch what he says when he comes to Washington, D.C. this September. Listen carefully to what his agenda is and the meaning behind the words. He's going to come to Washington, D.C. and speak before a joint session of Congress, many of whom are Roman Catholics and believe he's the vicar of Christ on the earth. And he's going to tell us that if we don't submit to a global authority, we're going to die. Humanity is going to be destroyed. Humanity is going to destroy itself. The God of gods was inept. He didn't provide us a sustainable earth. So we have to submit to a global authority to regulate the emission of carbon, to regulate the expenditure of energy in every form. We all have to learn to live to do without the conveniences of life, or we're going to die. And when he gets done promoting that propaganda, that antichrist papal propaganda in Washington, D.C., he's going to the United Nations to say the same thing. That's a global government. His global government. He's going to say the same thing to the United Nations. We have a new threat in the world, not just nuclear annihilation, but starvation, freezing to death, sickness, disease. We're really in trouble this time because God didn't provide us all that was necessary for a world full of people to praise his name. If you believe all that, I've got a bridge on the moon I'll sell you, but I'm not taking Federal Reserve notes for it. I want gold. Guess who owns all the gold? We'll be back right after this and get back to the book.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue here at First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. If you'd like to contact me directly, please do so by email. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Now, I've set the stage. Now, I will continue reading the book where we left off, backing up just one paragraph for continuity purposes last time. He says, this is the second full paragraph on page 118, if you're following along. While the Second Vatican Council was being prepared in Rome, Senator John F. Kennedy launched a run for the presidency of the United States. Kennedy was young, telegenic, and wealthy, all to his benefit. But he was also Catholic. Heretofore an insurmountable obstacle for a presidential candidate. The only Catholic ever to become a serious contender for the presidency was Governor Al Smith of New York, who had been pilloried for his religious beliefs when he ran against Herbert Hoover in 1928. That's right, there was a little Protestantism left in the world back in 1928. Smith lost badly, largely due to anti-Catholicism, which is this author's word for Protestantism. There was a protest against this Catholic candidate for president, and fears that Smith would be a puppet of the Pope if he were elected president. Now you know what the Protestants protested. They protested Smith, not because they didn't like Smith, but because they knew he was a devout Roman Catholic, and if he became the President of the United States, the Pope would run the government. So he was badly defeated. Now, 32 years later, John Kennedy would have to overcome what remained of anti-Catholic sentiment in the United States. Now, this author keeps using the term anti-Catholic. You can't blame Protestants in an age of ecumenism. Okay, you can't come right out and say that these anti-Catholics were Protestants, because that might wake up some Protestant sentiment in this country. So he just calls it anti-Catholicism. It's just kind of like anti-Semitism, only it's against Roman Catholics. We won't mention who it is, but you and me better know who he's referring to. Protestants. Okay? 32 years later, John Kennedy would have to overcome what remained of Protestantism and Protestant sentiment in the United States, not just in the general election, but in his own party's nomination process. Quote, Catholic baiting, that's what Protestantism is now called, Catholic baiting. Catholic baiting is as one conservative stated, quote, is the anti-Semitism of liberals, unquote. And liberals means Protestant. Liberals and heretics. That's what it says in all the previous Vatican councils and decrees. The Protestants were liberals. They're liberal and Protestant means the same thing. In Roman Catholic language, in papal language. Okay? So Catholic baiting is the new anti-Semitism of liberals, of Protestants. So if you're a Protestant, you're a Catholic baiter. I'm a Catholic baiter to Roman Catholics. See, it's just too correct to say that Tom's just not anti-Catholic. He's not a Catholic baiter. He's just mindful of history. He's mindful of Bible prophecy, and he's just telling you like it is. It's got to be reduced to something negative, doesn't it? Protestantism is linked with irrationality. Protestantism is now linked with anti-Semite like talk. It's hatred. It's persecutorial hatred is what Protestantism is. It's Catholic baiting. It's radical fundamentalism. It's based on the idea, the cockamamie idea, so said, that the Pope is the Antichrist, for crying out loud. Well, nobody believes the papacy is the Antichrist out. See how screwed up these people are? I mean, everybody believes in a future, a single individual, 7 years, in the midst of the week. New Israel, new Jerusalem, a new temple, new animal sacrifices, all that's yet to happen. But the Pope's not the Antichrist. But these people are still saying the Pope's the Antichrist. Bringing division when we're set on ecumenical unity. These people are psychotic. These people are hateful. These people need to be eradicated for there to be peace. Why, if you're a Protestant in the traditional sense, in the biblical and historical sense, and you're opposed to the Antichrist as the papacy, well, you need to be in an insane asylum. And your children need to be taken from you. You can't be raising up children with that mentality. Those days are over. We're going to have Christian unity whether you like it or not, Tom Fress. And you're enemy number one. And everybody like you. We're going to have peace with the Muslims. We're going to have peace with the Buddhists. We're going to have peace with every pagan religion in the world, and as long as the Pope's ahead of all of us. And we can still call ourselves Protestants or evangeli-bellies or whatever we want to call ourselves, but we're going to have peace. And we're not going to let you stir the pot and bring back this Protestant malarkey. I got news for you. God gets the last word in this one. Not Tom Friess, not anybody else. God himself. And I intend to be on the right side. I'm going to oppose this woman, and I'm going to oppose the beast upon which she rides. And I'm going to call America what it is prophetically, the second beast of Revelation chapter 13, which causes the whole world to worship the first beast. That is facts on the ground, visible history today. You cannot deny it. The first beast rose up out of the sea of people of Europe. The second beast rose up out of the wilderness. Where was the wilderness? Where the gospel was never before preached. In the United States of America. It started out Protestant, but the Antichrist took it over with the help of Protestants who dare to call themselves Protestants. When they no longer protest, they no longer know who the Antichrist is. That's how the second beast causes the whole world to worship the first beast. It's a willing participant in all the global papal proxy wars to bring this whole world into submission to a global government headed up by the papacy. Thanks to futurism. Thanks to Vatican Council II and the betrayal. The great betrayal, the great deception. Now back to the time of Kennedy, it says according to a 1959 Gallup poll, 24% of Americans would not vote for a Catholic. Who is it that would not vote for a Catholic for president? Protestants. Nobody else cares. It's only Protestants who would protest a Roman Catholic to be in the White House, knowing full well that he would be under spiritual and temporal power of the Pope and would do the bidding of the Pope so much as he could get by with. But there were 24% of Americans who were still Protestant, protesting. According to this Gallup poll in 1959. 24% of Americans would not vote for a Catholic. There was still some protest. A little protest, 24%. Now, remember something else, too. Remember that quote that when Roman Catholicism is in the minority in the land, they are meek as a lamb? Remember the colonial days when Roman Catholicism was only just a few tenths of 1 percentage point in the United States, an extreme minority. They weren't even allowed to practice Catholicism in their own colony, Maryland. The Protestants were, the greatest of all fears in any land is Roman Catholicism. The colonies were overwhelmingly Protestant, and the Catholics capitulated. They had no choice. Why, they were all for religious freedom. When in Roman Catholic history, there was no such thing as religious freedom. You were either Catholic or you were burning at the stake. There was no religious tolerance in the old world order. The sea beast allowed no religious liberty. But the wilderness beast allows religious liberty. You can worship any pagan god you want, and you can't persecute Catholics either. You can't persecute or speak ill about the Pope either. See, it started a Protestant land, but now in 1959, there's only 24% of Americans are Protestant. And guess what? At the same time, there were 25% Roman Catholics in the country, so that they were at parity, okay? And what's the second part of that quote? It says, When Roman Catholicism is in parody, they are sly as a fox. Now you know what Vatican Council II was. That was the fox. Now you know what futurism was all about. We've risen in power and authority and a percentage of the population. Now we've got a voice. Now we're going to promote futurism in the Protestant schools, Protestant churches. We're going to make them believe the papacy is not the Antichrist. They're going to completely forget it. In 2 or 3 generations, you won't find a Protestant anymore. They're all going to believe in a future Antichrist. It's somebody that's way off in the future they don't even have to worry about anymore. Besides that, we're going to teach them they're going to be raptured out before he comes anyway. Now, what comes after? First, meek as a lamb, then sly as a fox. What comes after that? When Roman Catholicism attains a majority, they roar like a lion. That's what's going to happen when this Pope comes to Vatican II, the Capitol. You ever notice the Capitol building looks just like St. Peter's? Stand back and look at both pictures side by side. The King of Kings and Lord of Lords that reigns at the Vatican is coming to reign and speak from, well, the mirror image of the beast. And there's not a word of protest. He's coming to say, in so many words, that our God is a joke. And if we keep being fruitful and multiplying, we're going to kill ourselves with carbon dioxide. We're going to die in our own feces. Or we're going to die of nuclear annihilation. Which is it? The God of gods is totally inept. That's the message that's coming to America in September. And you know what? The Christians are going to get right behind him. Forgetting their God. They've completely forgotten their God. They don't read their Bibles anymore. They got no faith in the God of gods. They have no faith in the Creator. They let this maniac from Rome come and spew anti-Christ propaganda in this country, and there's not a word of protest. And if there is anybody that protests, he dare not open his mouth because he'll be assailed by his own Christian brothers. Futurists. Not a historicist among them. He'll be destroyed by his own people if he opens his mouth. And the Catholics won't have to lift a finger. He'll be destroyed by his own people. His own family's going to turn against him. What do they stand to lose by roaring like a lion? What does the Vatican, what does the papacy stand to lose by roaring like a lion now? Not one thing. The truth is absent from this country. We all believe lies. Futurist lies designed to destroy us spiritually and physically. And that's just what's going to happen. That's what's already happened. He says, according to a 59 Gallup poll, 24% of Americans would not vote for a Catholic. The old suspicion that a Catholic leader would be beholden to the Pope resurfaced. That's the whole fear. The greatest of all fear in any nation is a papal government. That's what we left the old world order from. The sea beast dominated everything, owned everything, controlled everything, killed everybody that didn't agree with him. That's why we fled to this new wilderness. And now we've invited Rome. We've ecumenically reunited with Rome. We teach Roman doctrine, futurism. What's left for Protestants but the guillotines? What's left for true Protestants but the guillotines? And we're going to be called hateful. It is us who merely protest who are going to be called hateful. terrorists, a threat. He said the old suspicion that a Catholic leader would be beholden to the Pope resurfaced. Resurfaced. A resurfacing of Protestantism. Even during Vatican Council II, even during the threat of nuclear annihilation by godless communism, run by the Jesuits, of course, there was still a little Protestantism. And Kennedy once joked that if elected, he would appoint G. Bromley Oxnam, an anti-Catholic Methodist bishop, as his personal envoy to the Vatican to immediately, quote, open negotiations that transatlantic tunnel for negotiations for a transatlantic tunnel from Washington to Rome. Is that a joke? Is that funny? That he would appoint an anti-Roman Catholic bigot Methodist priest to open negotiations with the Vatican to build a tunnel between Washington and the Vatican? You know, Kennedy was a true Roman Catholic in the beginning, making jokes about Protestantism, making jokes about using Protestantism to completely seal the bond between Washington, D.C. and the Vatican, even at the very time that that was literally happening at Vatican Council II. You see, you have to be Protestant wise to understand the twistedness of that joke. When Kennedy was joking about recruiting an anti-Catholic Methodist bishop to build a tunnel between Washington and the Vatican City, ecumenism, Vatican Council II, was going on. There's your tunnel between Washington, D.C. and the Vatican. Vatican Council II was the tunnel. Because when you capitulate to Rome on spiritual things, you automatically capitulate to his temporal power. That means there ought to be an open line of communication between the Vatican and the government. You're no longer Protestant, you must be Catholic. There's no choice. There's no other form of Christianity. If you've renounced your Protestantism, you must be Catholic. You can help us build this tunnel between Washington, D.C. and the Vatican. Kennedy knew what was going on. He joked about it because he could do so without worrying about waking up anybody. The Protestants were completely defeated. They were only 24% of the population. And 75% of that 24% were signing capitulation to the Vatican at Vatican Council II. Rome now had a supermajority of Catholics and Protestants. What did he really have to fear? Roaring like a lion. I'm going to appoint G. Bromley Oxnam, an anti-Catholic Methodist bishop, as the personal envoy to the Vatican to immediately open discussions for the transatlantic tunnel from Washington to Rome. And that's exactly what was happening. And he didn't even have to nominate Bromley Oxnam. It was already in the process, Vatican Council II. You talk about cynicism, you talk about satanic cynicism. That was President John F. Kennedy in the beginning. Now, he says more seriously, he expressed frustration that his religion was an issue. Quote, I'm getting tired of these people who think I want to replace the gold at Fort Knox with holy water, unquote, he complained. Guess what? The Vatican had already replaced. Now, I'm not denying that there's gold in Fort Knox, but listen carefully. This makes perfect sense. If since 1913 we've had the Federal Reserve Act and all of our money is not backed by gold, it's a note. Every bill that we pass from one to another, when you go to the grocery store, you pass a bill. It's called a note, a loan. It's part of the national debt. It's worthless except for the paper it's printed on, just percentages of 1 cent. You know, it doesn't represent gold. All the gold is confiscated from the people. 33rd degree Roosevelt did that. Gold isn't the currency. The currency that we use isn't backed up by gold. Somebody else owns the gold, whether it's in Fort Knox or wherever it's at. It's not part of the money system. And listen to the cynicism. He says, I get tired of people saying that I'm going to replace the gold at Fort Knox with holy water. Do you know what is in the Fort Knox? If it's gold, it belongs to the papacy, because the papacy confiscated the gold to be collateral for the national debt that we incurred through the use of Federal Reserve notes, Jesuit notes. Is any of this sinking in? Is any of this sinking in? Listen to the cynicism. The Vatican owns all the gold. They confiscated the gold because of the national debt, which came through the Federal Reserve System. All we got to do is print more money. We've got Mayor Amschel, Mayor Rothschild saying, I care not. If I control the nation's money, I care not who makes its laws. And who was Mayor Amschel, Mayor Rothschild? He was a Jesuit banker. He was the one who was the guardian of the Vatican treasure. The guardian of the papal treasure. That's what it says in the Encyclopedia Judaica. Those banks, you know, everybody can go so far as to tell you that the Federal Reserve Bank is owned by the Rothschilds, but they won't even listen to you if you tell them in the Jewish Encyclopedia it is admitted that they are Vatican bankers. Every time a discussion comes up among some of my acquaintances on these subjects, they can tell you all about the evils of the Federal Reserve Bank and the worthless money and the Rothschilds banking dynasty that really owns it. But when I ask them, well, who do they work for? They can't remember. So I tell them again. And the next night I ask them the same question. Who did the Rothschilds work for? They can't tell me. So I tell them again. They are the guardians of the papal treasure. It's what it says in the Encyclopedia Judaica. I've looked it up myself. You ask them the next night, who do they work for? They can't tell you. I mean, there's a blindness over these people that cannot be penetrated. Will you be one of those who are so blind that cannot remember from one day to the next who controls the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States? Who is the holder of all the loans, the Federal Reserve notes that are passed around like currency in this country? It's the Vatican! So who does all the gold belong to then? Surely I don't have to do the math for you on this one. And here we have the first Roman Catholic president of the United States. I'm tired of these people who think that I want to replace the gold at Fort Knox with holy water. Because that's what he did. Until Christ got a hold of him. Then he made an attempt to abolish the Federal Reserve Bank, and it got him killed by his own church. In September of 1960, he tried to put the matter to rest in a speech before a group of Protestant ministers in Houston, Texas. Quote, I do not speak for my church on public matters, unquote, he declared, and quote, the church does not speak for me, unquote. Appealing to basic American values of fairness, he asked his audience to consider what it would mean if 40 million Roman Catholic Americans, I will add the word Roman Catholic, he said, what would it mean if 40 million Americans lost the chance to become president on the day that they were baptized, unquote. You Protestants, how American could you be to suggest that I should not be president just because I was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church? Where is your Christian unity? Are you going to disenfranchise 40 million tax-paying, crusade-fighting American Catholics from the presidency of the United States just because they were baptized in the Roman Catholic Church? Where is your respect for religious liberty? Where's the ecumenism in your life? You ought to be ashamed of yourself to suggest that I, a Roman Catholic, would allow the papacy to rule my White House. And preventing me from becoming a president of the United States is the same as disenfranchising 40 million American Roman Catholics. Shame on you. That was John Kennedy. He had to assure what remained of Protestantism that he wouldn't let the Pope run the White House. Where's the concern for that today?